The Digital Services Act is a law that has been introduced by the European Union and that was basically planned and promoted by the current president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, as well as Thierry Breton, the European Internal Market Commissioner. And basically the goal of this law is to update current regulations of the European Union of online content, the regulation specifically of illegal content such as misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, and child pornography, and those kinds of issues. So that's basically the goal of the legislation, is to clamp down on illegal content on the internet.
And who gets to decide what is illegal content? What is the governing body that's going to be sitting in a room deciding what content is safe for us and is legal?
Well, the jurisdiction or the competent authorities will be divided between the European Commission and those that it nominates on one hand, and the national member states, the member states of the European Union on the other. It'll be a divided authority. But when it comes to the large social media companies such as Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Google, the very large ones, which are defined as very large online platforms, the European Commission will be responsible for policing issues like hate speech and disinformation. So personally, I find this to be very worrying, because it puts in law, in European law, the principle that very vague categories such as disinformation and hate speech that are notoriously vulnerable to politicization will effectively be enforced at a Europe-wide level through an army of fact-checkers that are endorsed and legitimated by the European Commission. So basically, we're handing our freedom of expression to European bureaucracy.
Well, Thierry Breton, he says in a series of tweets to kind of clarify the position on this. He's like, "Don't worry, you have nothing to worry about here. We're not going to do anything nefarious at all." Just reading through his string of tweets on this, he says, "My services and I will thoroughly enforce the DSA, and fully use our new powers to investigate and sanction platforms where warranted. Comply with the DSA is not a punishment, it's an opportunity, David, for platforms to reinforce their trustworthiness." If I ever heard like something written by a politician, I mean, that is like the perfect sentence. It's an opportunity for platforms to reinforce their trustworthiness. Child protection will be an enforcement priority, as will be fighting disinformation, including pro-Russian propaganda, in particular as we are entering a period of elections in Europe. So they're going to be on the lookout for any sort of pro-Russian propaganda. They fully want to be in the tank, I guess, promoting a proxy war in Ukraine. I don't know, but who gets to decide what is pro-Russian propaganda?
Well, this is the issue. The fundamental issue with these sorts of laws is they take these kind of nebulous categories that sound very innocent to a lot of people, like disinformation or hate speech, and they enshrine them as principles of law that then must be interpreted by public officials and bureaucrats and judges. And of course, the issue is, as we've seen over the last few years, concepts like disinformation can be very easily interpreted to advance a particular political vision of reality. So politicians, public officials, political organizations, people in power will use these categories to advance their own narratives. And the net effect of this kind of act, this Digital Services Act, is to empower a bureaucracy to go around protecting the official narrative that is favored by the European Union, the European Commission, on issues like the Ukraine war with Russia, issues like any kind of future pandemic, and issues like, transgender ideology and politics. All of these issues, instead of being just fought out in the public sphere in a democratic manner, we're going to have basically an army of bureaucrats, of fact checkers, telling us what the correct position is in advance. Yes, I agree that in a sense, this particular Digital Services Act is a Trojan horse in the sense that it's dressed up in the language of, we want to go against child pornography. We want to make sure that information is kind of responsibly used, and we want more transparency and so on. But in reality, as I said, essentially what it does is it puts ordinary users of Twitter and Facebook at the mercy of faceless bureaucrats, not only in the social media companies now, but also in a government organization that can then instruct the social media companies. And by the way, they have enormous enforcement powers because they can fine social media companies up to 6% of their annual turnover, annual global turnover, for failing to comply with their policies or not taking sufficient action against, disinformation or hate speech and so on. So I think that we are facing a really possibly dystopian future in the European Union regarding, freedom of expression. And maybe the one bright cloud, the little lining in the cloud, the bright lining in the grey cloud, is that Article 11 of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is on freedom of expression, says that European citizens have the right to receive and impart information without interference by public authorities. So that remains in place. So I think we may be facing a legal battle very soon, and hopefully there will be these bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats, will be taken to account for this really draconian assault on freedom of expression, maybe even using existing European law this Charter of Fundamental Rights could be a weapon to use against this legislation. Overall, it's clear that any citizen who cares about freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and indeed the future of a free way of life should be very, very, very concerned about the Digital Services Act. And I think our conversation here could be a good way of galvanizing public awareness of this issue, because the Act is in place. It's going to probably be applied. But hopefully the very fact that we're thinking about it and that citizens are aware of it will make them seek other avenues for finding information and not blindly trust whatever they see on the internet, especially when they know that it's been filtered and fact-checked by these bureaucrats. So awareness is one way to combat these sorts of authoritarian measures.